from the wind-swept high plain desert of Wyoming. Nothing grows there. Even this yellow grass that you're seeing has trouble growing. It just happens that my father is a grass specialist. He can name every blade of grass on the prairie by its Latin and common name. So you can imagine that he is less than enthused when these sneaky little vermin would burrow into the prairie to build their dens, gobble up the grass, and create these unsightly dirt mounds that polka-dotted the prairie. My father was determined to save the prairie from their poor building practices. But because prairie dog architects can't learn any other way to build, in true Wild West fashion, it did not end well for the prairie dogs. Over the past 20 years, the green trend has been doing the same thing, trying to save our planet from our poor building practices. We have our own way of gouging into the earth, gobbling up natural resources, and building unsightly buildings and cities that, like little pimples or oozing viruses all over our landscape. This doesn't make me happy. I want our planet to thrive. So today, I have one message for you. Just joking. Some environmentalists might call this the high road, but it's not a road we want to travel down. I want all of us to thrive, our planet and the humans. And I think that the answer looks more like this. Now is the time for us to be conscious of how our environment impacts us and to accept responsibility for what we create and how we choose to live. My belief is that if we choose beauty, if we choose simplicity and choose purity in the materials with which we build, we will thrive in our environments. And when I say thrive in our environments, what I'm saying is that architecture has the power to impact all areas of our life, all dimensions of well-being. I call this wellness architecture. Now, architecture today is better than it has been, but it's not as good as we think it is. Like the prairie dog architects, unlike the prairie dog architects, architects today are not building simply or with natural materials, because our building practices are so much more sophisticated. They're complex and they're toxic. But toxicity isn't something that we learn about in school. We have to go on to practice before we actually learn what materials to specify. And get this, we're learning what to specify by the vendors and manufacturers selling us the products. So you can imagine that this can mislead us, and it can lead to some pretty nasty stuff, like eco-friendly spray foam. Now, spray foam is composed of 50% carcinogenic material. 50% of the chemicals are disruptive to your development and to your children's development. 50% of the chemicals harm our respiratory system. 36% of the chemicals are known to be deathly poisons to mammals. 30% are toxify our organs. And if that's not enough, it also disrupts our endocrine systems and reproductive systems. It causes eye irritation and skin irritations, and that's just the human health impact. Spray foam also has environmental health impacts. It's known to increase global warming. It contributes to ozone depletion, acidification of our planet, smog formation, and it has a high embodied energy content. So how can they outrageously claim that it's an eco-friendly product? Well, because it's energy efficient. And it's when we look at things with such a narrow lens that we can do things like take this incredibly nasty product and call it a green product, or even call it best practices. Today's best practices are not actually the best practices available for us. And this is the first of 7 key aspects all of us need to be aware of if we're going to make traction in wellness architecture. Number 1, we can't afford to greenwash, and we can't afford to wellwash. Listen to your intuition. Would you rather be surrounded by insulation installed with some guy in a hazmat suit, or would you rather be insulated by her blown-in sheep's wool? We have to move from this concept of doing less harm and start conceptualizing how to enhance our health and well-being. And that leads me to our second point. We need to consider how the environment impacts all aspects of human well-being. So first, let's define well-being. Well-being is a person's subjective perception of their existence. It's a state that's classified as kind of their satisfaction with their life circumstance. So life circumstance might be social and occupational. It's about their health, mental and physical. And it's about their happiness, emotional. And finally, it's about their prosperity, both their financial and their spiritual prosperity. Science has proven that your environment directly impacts all 7 of these aspects, and that all 6 of your senses are required to have experiences that make this impact. So for those of you that were paying attention, I did say 6 senses on purpose, but we'll get back to this. So we have to design for all dimensions of wellness, and that's point number 3. We have to understand how architecture has the power to change our behavior. So we defined well-being as somebody's perception of their existence. Wellness is defined by somebody's approach to their lifestyle choices, by a deliberate effort. It's behavior. There's been decades and decades of environmental psychology research that shows that your surroundings directly impact your behavior. In architecture, we call this change architecture or nudge architecture. And workplace wellness has made massive leaps in this today, trading out their old wellness programs for actually truly caring about their employees' well-being and knowing that if you can change your space, you can change your culture. And if you can change your culture, you can change things like presenteeism, absenteeism, job performance, productivity, even things like cognitive function. Corporations are starting to clue in to this idea of wellness architecture, and society needs to too. And that's point number 4. We need to stop using money as an excuse to build unhealthy buildings. Finnish architect Oliver Arto was once asked how Finland, being such a poor country, could afford to build such high-quality buildings. He responded, "We are such a poor country, we can't afford not to." So I guess these rich countries are just saying that we can afford the healthcare costs, right? Well, let's use the US as an example, and I'm going to use round numbers to illustrate my point. The US economy is approximately $19 trillion annually. $4 trillion is associated and goes to our healthcare costs. So let's just say that we could make a 25% difference if we incorporated wellness strategies into our architecture. 25% of $4 trillion is $1 trillion. $1 trillion happens to be the same amount of money that we spend on the building industry each year. So what if we could spend twice as much building environments that made you thrive, that made your neighbor thrive? What if we were surrounded by people that were happy, that were healthy, that were performing at their highest potential? What would our economy look like then? And if you're still not convinced, consider the risks of not building well. Consider what happens when somebody with the next generation Fitbit walks into your space, which makes them not feel very well, and they're actually able to prove it's making them sick. What is the cost of the legal exposure to that? It's time to take responsibility for how we build. And luckily, we have some good tools helping us do that, checklists and rating systems. But before I talk about that, I want to make my next point, which is number 5. Checklists cannot replace intuition. The most beautiful works of architects are designed from an intuitive design process. When we talk about human well-being, it's the epitome of complexity. It has so many multifaceted aspects and causes that are each affecting individuals differently. Intuition handles this complexity with wisdom and elegance, where our rational brain is kind of scurrying around trying to categorize it and figure it out. Now, our rational mind is a tool to our intuition, and checklists are tools to our rational mind. So this is showing the green standards and rating systems whose primary focus is environmental health. 28 have sprung up all over the globe in the last 20 years. In recent years, we have started to see some standards emerge focused on human health and regenerative systems. What this graphic is showing is that basically as the environmental or green trend starts to plateau out and become mainstream, which is a good thing, the wellness trend is just starting to emerge. And this is wonderful, but again, remember, architecture is an art, and you cannot replace human ingenuity, creativity, or intuition with a simple checklist. Instead of aspiring to conquer a checklist, let's aspire to build like nature. And this is point number 6. Let's build buildings with regenerative systems and natural materials that can be occupied for centuries. Ones with simple materials that can be installed without a hazmat suit. Ones that age and patina beautifully over time, not fall apart and go to a landfill. And they don't have to be mud huts. They can be multi-story, multi-family structures built with many, many different natural materials. They can be elegant. Let's build buildings that are inspired by the local landscape and change with weather and light to reflect and blend with nature. Let's build buildings that grow out of nature, buildings with passive designs that work with the local ecology and use ancient craftsmanship and details that keep our rich culture heritage alive. Heck, let's grow buildings where we can graft tree cells onto frameworks and that the contractors can become arborists. But before we get to this point, let's continue to use philosophies like biomimicry and biophilia, and let's, I don't know, put Louis Schwartzberg's moving art into our architecture. Let's work towards understanding how our surroundings empower wellness, and let's spread our awareness. And this leads me to point number 7. We need to be educated with a deep understanding of well-being, not just health. As an architect, we are required to log continuing education credits towards health, safety, and welfare to maintain our license. We call these HSW credits. Now, 2 weeks ago, I was sitting at a very formal American Institute of Architects training session, and an award-winning architect was showing slide after slide after slide of beautiful work. He stopped and paused himself, and he said, "Oh yeah, let's get those HSWs out of the way. Well, for health, look at my building. It's beautiful. That takes care of mental health. For S, look at how I shed the roofs over walkways so that no snow or icicles can hit somebody in the head. That's safe. And look, clearly these people are prospering, so we have welfare taken care of." The crowd laughed, and I got 1 hour of HSW credits. And this happens more commonly than you think it would. But I have good news for you. This is changing, and it's changing with the people in this room and with this organization. I chair the Wellness Architecture Initiative for the Global Wellness Institute. A few months ago in June, we had a roundtable and forum. One of the gentlemen that was attending was the CEO of NCARB, the National Architectural Registration Board. Basically, he's the guy in charge of telling architects what we have to learn and what we're liable for. I said, "Hey, Mike, how's it going? What were your takeaways from that day?" He said, "Well, I'm happy to announce that I've briefed all my senior staff, and we are going to change the W in HSW from welfare to well-being." Yeah. So imagine that. Imagine changing one word and the impact that can have. It can change the codes that legislators adopt, it can change the curriculum that academics teach, and it can change the environments that architects create. So let's start reimagining what our environments look like. Let's start imagining what the future of wellness architecture looks like. And let's start with our everyday lifestyles and rituals. Take our kitchen, for example. Your kitchen is a version of a 1950s kitchen when the trend was to make life more convenient. We built all of these appliances, and we created dead food and non-food that we could put in these dark little cupboards and pantries so that you could quickly consume it months or even years later. Well, we don't want to eat like that anymore. We want living, healthy, organic, local food. And we want our food to heal us, it to be its natural medicine with spices, aromas, and rituals. My office is reinventing the kitchen, and like the 1950s, we're inspired to add convenience to our fast-paced digital worlds, but in a way that allows us to eat nourishing and living food. Imagine what science is making possible. Today, organizations are coming together to spur innovation and cross-pollination across fields. The X Prize is one of these examples. They're offering $10 million to the first team of architects and microbiologists that can grow an 8-foot wall that has the same performance metrics of today. And imagine what technology is making possible. Imagine how biosensors or high-speed cameras could read your temperature and heart rate in order to recognize your mood and give you the emotional boost you need by integrating color therapy or sound therapy into your environment. And finally, and this is closest to my heart, imagine how our spaces can nourish our soul. Each one of you has an energy field that can be measured with scientific instruments 10 feet away from you. Some of you in the audience are saying, oh yeah, duh, that's my aura. But it doesn't matter how you label it. What's important is that you don't need one of your 5 senses to consciously tell you that something is your environment before it starts having an effect on you. I could blindfold you and take you into different spaces, and you would start physiologically responding, your heart rate, your blood temperature, your skin. So think about how profound that is, that your space is constantly impacting you, and that was the 6th sense that I was talking about. It's constantly adapting and noticing the environments around you. This is the power that architecture has, and science has yet to explore. I'm starting to have initial conversations with top engineers and acousticians to discuss how we might be able to analyze unique vibrational frequencies of different materials, and just like a musician, compose these in such a way to create harmonic resonance, not only with each other, but with the earth. Think how we could use that to fine-tune this energy field that extends beyond you. If we understand the science behind the spaces that impact us and shift our focus from environmental health to human well-being, we can create wellness architecture. And this isn't just the job of the architect. This is for each one of you. 90% of us spend time indoors, and each one of us can be impacted by if we understand how our environment is impacting every single aspect of our life. Because if we all work together and analyze our decisions through a wellness lens, we will end up making decisions that are both good for humans and good for the environment. We have to move from environmentalism to wellism. Thank you.